guys, welcome to Storytime with Jester. Tonight we'll be picking up where we left off last week, the Book of Prophecies. Starting with Andor's journal. Star Day 1, 1235. Xavier's castle is finished. I will enjoy celebrating the festival this year at his tower. Free Day 2, 1235. I learned today that Miranda has finally returned to Rochefort. I must go see her. Chapter 70. Andor was in his study, writing in his journal, when a knock at the door interrupted his train of thought. The door opened, and one of his acolytes, Taniel, leaned in and said, "Bishop, Marakai is here to see you." "Ah, wonderful," Andor exclaimed. "Send him in." Andor was excited to see his friend. It had been a long while since they had spoken. A quick rap on the door, and it opened. Marakai walking in. He was adorned all over as usual with his many throwing daggers and his crossbow slung by his side. Strapped to his hip was his bejeweled dragon slayer sword. "Marakai, old friend," Andor greeted, excitement in his voice. "How have you been?" "None worse for the wear," Marakai replied, coldly, as was his normal disposition. "What brings you to Sanctuary?" Andor asked. "Aslanor has decided someone should scout out the cursed desert to see what the two traitors are up to. When I found out one of them was Eurasian, I volunteered to lead the expedition." "Have you put together a good group?" Andor inquired, intrigued. "Most are friends of ours," Marakai replied. "Eric, Devon, and Thorfinn are going, as well as a couple of mages Aslanor vouched for. Although Devon has the power to heal, we were hoping you would join us." "I wish that I could," Andor replied, regret in his voice, "but I have much research to do, and a quest of my own to complete. I'm afraid I'll have to sit this one out." Just as he finished his rejection of Devon's ask, there was a knock at the door again. "Bishop," Taniel said as he leaned once again into the room, "you have another visitor." "Tell him I'm busy," Andor replied. Then, as Taniel started to leave, Andor said, "Wait, who is it?" "A priest of Finian named Ulrich," Taniel said. Andor thought out loud, then said, "Send him in." "Marakai, when do you leave for the cursed desert?" "Within the hour." "Will you wait until I see you once more?" "As you wish." The door opened and Ulrich entered, as Marakai departed, closing the door behind him. "What brings a priest of Finian to these parts?" Andor asked, curious as to a rival priest's visit. "I was told you have in your possession a unique sword, one that I would much like to acquire." "What sword would that be?" Andor asked, knowing already his visitor was more than likely referring to the only sword he had in his possession, as he had no use for such weapons. "I am in search of a blade that possesses the power of the sun." "And you are under the impression that I have such a blade?" Andor stated. "Do you not?" Ulrich asked, irritated. "If that be the case, waste not my time, and I will seek it elsewhere." "What would such a blade be worth to you?" Andor asked. Before Ulrich could respond, Andor continued, "Your sources were correct. I have the blade you seek, but it is no small price I ask." Shaking a pouch full of coins, Ulrich responded, "Gold I have aplenty." "My price is not monetary," Andor said. "You must agree to let me place a quest upon you." "What is the nature of this quest?" Ulrich asked. "That man you passed upon entering this room, he is leading a scouting expedition to the cursed desert, and is in sore need of a priest with much healing powers. Your quest would be this: accompany his troop into the cursed desert and provide all manner of healing that he requires for himself and his troop. Remain with him until his mission is successful and he returns safely. Agree to this quest, and the sword is yours when you leave here today." Ulrich thought but just a moment before responding. He held out his arm and spoke but one word. Agreed. Chapter 71. Andor marveled at the architectural design in the rebuilding of Rochefort. Most of the walled city was destroyed in the retaking. Andor had never seen an elven city before, but the new Rochefort gave him a small glimpse at what one could offer to the eye. The towers were made to look like the body of a dragon with its wings outstretched into the adjoining wall. The head of each dragon had mouth open, as if they were about to breathe fire. The gatehouse was magnificent to behold. The dragons on the two towers faced each other, one wing reaching out to the other dragon, forming the image of an arch, while the other wing went in towards the innermost towers, which duplicated the appearance. Open-mouthed dragon heads lined the ramparts all along the gatehouse, facing inwards. Once inside the city, the splendor continued. Trees and gardens had been planted throughout, and the buildings bore the elven design as well. Andor made his way up the streets until he was at the palace. He hadn't sent word to Miranda that he was coming, and he had never been to Rochefort before, so he was held up for a while until word came down that he could pass. Once inside the palace, he was instructed to wait on the balcony which overlooked the harbor. From that vantage point, he could make out two great galleys and a galleon in the naval docks, along with various smaller craft. The king's navy had pretty much been scuttled during the war, so to see such a sight gave Andor much hope for the kingdom. "You should have told me you were coming," a soft voice said from behind him. Turning, he saw a beautiful blonde-haired woman standing before him. Not the Miranda he knew, but one he had caught a brief glimpse of with the use of his gem. "My, how you've changed," he said, smiling. "Is this the real you?" "Yes," she replied. "No one here has ever seen the other me, and of my friends, you are the first to see the real me. I want to thank you for not giving away my secret. I know you saw through my illusion. Only a true friend would have kept that to themselves. For that I am truly grateful." "It looks like you've been busy," he said, with a wave of his hand, alluding to everything he had seen up till now. "Actually, I have my aides Garth and Marshak to thank for that. I've been preoccupied." "I take it then your journey was successful?" "Yes," she said, her smile widening. "Very. How long can you stay?" "At least a few days," Andor replied, "if I don't wear out my welcome." "Then come," she said, pleased. "I would much like to hear all that has become of Andor the Wise while I was away." Chapter 72. Andor left for the Great Forest in early spring of the year 1233. He left Taniel in charge of Sanctuary, taking Chatham and Drexel with him. Chatham was a brown robe like Andor, but Drexel was of the Third Order of the Church of St. Columba, the Green Berets as they were known. His hat was topped off with a red ball. He wore a red and green tartan cloak over his plate mail armor and carried a shield. He had long auburn hair and green eyes. Chatham wore his robes over chainmail. He had brown hair and blue eyes. His favorite weapon of all things was a sling. To hear him boast, he could knock a gnat off a horse's back at 100 yards, and without the horse even flinching. The three of them would not be going alone, at least not the whole way. Aslanor was loaning them the service of Vail Ferris, his elven associate. She would be their guide through the eastern lands and help them navigate the great forest once they got there. She met them at Aslanor's tower. The introductions were short, as Veril was very cold and dispassionate towards the three priests. Drexel decided that during their long journey he would convert this heathen to the ways of St. Columba. As they passed the rolling hills east of Aslanor's tower and entered into the Duchy of Venique, Andor realized he was as far east as he had ever been. As they journeyed through the duchy, he was amazed at the richness of the land. He had thought Folkreach was the most fertile land in the world, but walking through the lands of Venique made him realize just how wrong he had been. His heart was warmed when he realized how influential St. Columba was here. Wayward shrines and temples to St. Columba were everywhere, allowing Drexel to concentrate his efforts on Veril. Well before they reached the great forest, Drexel had concluded, due to her coldness towards his entreaties, that she was going to be a tough nut to crack. What was it Andor had once said? Blessings are upon the head of the just, but a rod is for the back of him that is void of understanding. It might just take a good solid whack from Miss Shillelagh to knock some sense into her, Drexel thought to himself. 5 weeks after his departure from Sanctuary, Andor was at the edge of the great forest. The last few days had been under the concealment of an invisibility spell courtesy of Veril. They had been on alert during this time, for they were traveling in the kingdom of the dead. Veril was odd, Andor thought, even for an elf. There was something not quite right about her, but he could not put a finger on it. He was certain that he had seen her once in Osnaburg, in the company of Ulrich and others. He hadn't recognized Ulrich at the time when he gave him the sword, but seeing Veril at Aslinor's tower sparked his memory. Yet when he brought it up to Veril, she had no recollection of the event, nor even knowing Ulrich. Strange one, this lass. As he was pondering the curiosities of Veril, they came upon some woodsmen, or at least what Andor took as woodsmen. Given the nature of the great forest, and its locale in the kingdom of the dead, they could just as well be bandits or worse. He would keep his mouth shut and follow Veril's cue. Whoso keepeth his mouth and his tongue keepeth his soul from troubles. That didn't quite fit this situation, but he would allow himself leniency in the interpretation for this occasion. Suddenly, Andor received a stern push from behind, causing him to stumble forth out of the radius of protection of the invisibility spell. There he was, seemingly all alone amidst a half-dozen woodsmen. Startled, the woodsmen immediately drew their weapons and took defensive stances. "What is your cause?" one of the woodsmen hailed, keeping his sword at the ready while the others scanned the woods for other sudden appearances. "I seek the druidess known as Yerdosti Oakstone," Andor replied. "Are you a friend of the druidess?" the woodsman returned, sword still at the ready. "If you mean, do I know her?" Andor responded, "the answer is no. I am, however, friend to all that seek to defeat the atrocities that befall the good people of this world. I have come to seek her counsel." The woodsman relaxed somewhat, but still kept his sword at the ready. Andor began scanning the woodsman's thoughts to determine if he were friend or foe. Satisfied with what he detected, he said, "I have 2 associates with me as well. Drexel, Chatham, reveal yourselves." At this, Veril stepped away from the 2 priests, causing them to appear before the woodsman. The woodsman finally lowered his sword, as did the others their weapons. "We know of the druidess, but like you, have never met her. We will take you to the Ranger Lord at Havenford." It had been about a half-day since Andor had met the woodsman. The forest was teeming with small animals, rabbits, squirrels, birds, and other friendly creatures of nature. With what occurred when he met Brehai Mathen, he could but wonder if perhaps one of those creatures was Yerdosti Oakstone. His thoughts quickly switched to that of Veril. She hadn't made herself known to the woodsman, and he wondered if she was even with them still. Surely she was, for Aslinor did not choose his friends lightly. Still, she was cold and distant, a trait that left him feeling uncomfortable in her presence and in the absence of it. Drexel had decided to try his luck with the woodsman. They were better listeners than Veril, although he did have a captive audience unless they were to abandon them. He meant well, but sometimes could be a little overbearing, annoying. As Drexel was haranguing them on the folly of their ways, Andor noticed movement off to his left. As he was behind the rest, no one else saw it. As he looked in the direction of the movement, he thought he saw for a brief instant a small face peering around the side of a tree. He paused, without alerting the rest, to see if his eyes were playing tricks on him or not. What would a little girl, for that is what he thought he saw, be doing out here by herself? His eyes didn't have to wait long for confirmation, for a little girl with blonde hair darted out from behind the tree and hid behind another. Peering around it at Andor, she put an index finger up to her lips and then ran towards a huge oak tree. To Andor's amazement, she disappeared inside it. Before he could even utter a sound, her head popped out from inside the tree, and she motioned with her hand for Andor to come to her. Taking a glance ahead, Andor saw that the others were oblivious to him and the girl. He moved towards the oak, all the while preparing to defend himself if necessary, for he was well aware of such forest creatures as would lure a man to his death. As he neared the tree, the blonde-haired girl was standing outside waiting for him. When he was close enough where only he could hear her speak, she said, "Come, Andor," and walked straight inside the tree, disappearing from sight as if walking into some magical portal. Taking a paused glance back, as if looking to assure no one was watching, he entered the large oak where the little girl had disappeared. He was fascinated to find out that he seemed to be inside the tree. Not like before with Mayor, this was different, much different. The tree was not hollowed out, but still somehow had space to accommodate standing room for him and several others. Standing next to him was not a little girl, but a young woman. She wore a full-length forest green cloak that covered her otherwise scantily clad body, and thigh-high brown leather boots. Her long blonde hair was plaited into a single braid down the center of her back. She bore an ashen staff in her left hand that was decorated with feathers, as was her hair. "Our words are our own here," she said. "Are you Yerdosti Oakstone?" Andor said. "Yes," she replied, "and you are Andor of Sanctuary." "You know of me?" he asked, intrigued. "I know of you. Your deeds precede you." "What deeds do you speak of?" he asked, wondering how much about him she knew. "You cured Mayor Cran of his affliction, and did not attack Brehai Mathan when she charged you in bear form. Lockru of Henwick calls you friend, and you are the only person to have read the Book of Prophecies and kept his sanity. Tell me, Andor the Wise, what is it you seek from me?" "I wish to go to the past," he said. "Many wish to do that which would destroy much, for many selfish reasons. What is yours?" As he looked at her, wondering how much would be safe to divulge, he saw in her face a look as if she held the answers of time itself, as if she already knew what it was he would say before he even thought the words. "I've been trying to understand the prophecy. It is very difficult to decipher the cryptic meaning of the words written. I believe that those whose visions have penned each prophecy actually saw something unique, different than what was actually created on those emerald pages. Mayor is the only surviving author of the book, until me. If I am to fully understand what St. Columba is trying to say, to warn us about, I must find out what the other authors saw in their visions. My first thought was to go to Tosh Darvoza. However, both Mayor and Brehai said that sight was no longer functioning. I was instructed to seek you out for the way." "I have not the power you seek," she replied. "Brehai said you were the most powerful druid in the world," Andor said, a mixture of emotions in his voice. "In this world, in this time," she answered. "It was not always the case," she explained. "Long ago, before many histories were even written, the Destroyer entered our world, an entity so malign that if left alone, he would have undone creation itself. Led by the All-Father and All-Mother, all the gods, both good and evil, joined forces to destroy the Destroyer. So powerful was he that even all their combined might could not overcome him. It was not until the Hierarchs sacrificed themselves that the Destroyer was able to be bound." "The Hierarchs?" Andor interrupted. "The 8 most powerful druids in existence," she replied. "The lore masters. When they left, they took with them the ancient lore of the druidic faith." "Wait," Andor interrupted again. "Left? I thought you said they sacrificed themselves." "Sacrificed, not in the way of death. Before the Destroyer, the Hierarchs were the judges and governors of all nature on this world. They had the lore and the knowledge of it. For the Destroyer to be bound, they had to sever their ties to this world and be bound themselves, much like the Destroyer. The ancient lore went with them, and as a result, the ability of any druid to gain power above that of the Grand Druid." "I'm not quite following," Andor said, confused. "The Grand Druid is said to hail from the harvest. Did you supplant him?" "No," Yerdosti answered. "The Grand Druid holds his position still in the Reaper's forest." "Then how is it you have more power?" "I am a Hierarch," Yerdosti proclaimed. Chapter 73. Oswald touched another fire stick to his pipe and took a couple deep draws before shaking the flame out on the stick and tossing it into the dead hearth. "So let me get this straight," he said. "Yerdosti broke some sort of cosmic agreement, and now the destroyer is free to wreak havoc on our world?" "Not exactly," Andor replied. "From what she said, hundreds of years ago, a hierarch did return, but was no longer one devoted to the protection of nature or the world. The hierarch disappeared some time after that in the Great Southern Swamp. Since then, a succession of druids has taken the place of that hierarch, the knowledge of such a position seemingly made known at the time of the hierarch's return. Yerdosti has held the position for quite some time now." "What of the destroyer?" Lockrew asked. He had been listening in silence until now. "Yerdosti said that the appearance of the hierarch would mean, at the very least, that the bindings holding the destroyer would have been weakened." "What of the other 7 hierarchs?" Lockrew asked. "She did not say," Andor replied. "So what will you do now?" Oswald asked. "How will you ask your questions of those long-dead priests?" "She told me one other thing," Andor offered. "There is a hierarch higher than even those 8. Lockrew's eyes widened, for he had no knowledge of such a thing. "She spoke of the other 7 as having the powers of the elements," Andor started. Then, looking at Lockrew, said, "You know of this?" Lockrew nodded, indicating that he did. "Well," Andor continued, "this higher hierarch supposedly has the power over time itself." "Where is this hierarch?" Lockrew asked. "Did she say?" "I asked her," Andor said. "She did not know." "That didn't exactly answer my question, though," Oswald said. "How will you find your answers?" "I haven't figured that out yet," Andor said. "I will start with prayers to St. Columba, seeking his wisdom and knowledge." "Prayer is always the best place to start," Oswald said. "Yes, it is, friend," Andor agreed. "Yes, it is." Andor was about to head back to Sanctuary when a motley-looking crew came hobbly wearing into Henwick. Andor paused, studying the group as they approached. "Jovan!" Andor greeted his friend. "Where do you and your companions come from? You look like you've been through hell itself." Jovan didn't answer at first, instead turning to one of his companions, an elf with red hair and hazel eyes. "Talriel," Jovan said, "secure us a couple of rooms at the inn. I'll join you shortly." The elf said nothing, just nodded and headed towards the Shady Dragon Inn. Jovan then turned towards a man dressed in mail. His shield was strapped to his back, and he was carrying a long object covered in what looked to be a blanket. "Drew, come with me and the bishop." Then finally turning to Andor, he said, "We have need of the room. There is something I must show you." Andor hadn't noticed until now that 2 black wolves flanked Jovan. "I see you've taken on quite the retinue. Where is Kelvin?" "He is off finding the mine that deed of his goes to. I believe he shook some of Thorfinn's dragon horde. I think he took some of Thorfinn's dragon horde with him as mercenary guards." Andor and Jovan went into the Shady Dragon Inn and accessed the private room, followed by Drew, the 2 wolves, a scraggly bearded fighter with an eye patch, and a female elven half-breed. Drew laid the huge object he had been carrying on the table, and everyone sat in the chairs surrounding. The 2 wolves stood by Jovan, again flanking him. Within seconds, Talriel entered the room, closed the door, and locked it. "Should I ask what's under the blanket?" Andor jibed, but was very interested to find out. "I was sent by the Ranger Lord of the Gnarled Woods to investigate an area reported to be the stronghold of an evil sect of druids. I took my company with me," he said, gesturing to his companions. "We located the stronghold and defeated the druids, but what we found was very disturbing. It seems they were trying to summon forth some evil being, a god maybe. We managed to stop them before they succeeded, but in our search of the place we found this." He gestured towards the object under the blanket on the table. It was contained in a chest, lying on a black velvet, like some sort of valuable treasure or artifact. "Why not just transport it in the chest you found it in? Why the blanket?" "We could not lift the chest," the bearded man said. "Andor," Jovan said, "this is Shaggy." "The chest was empty, and we couldn't even budge the thing," Shaggy added. "So we wrapped it in a blanket," Jovan said. "Is an unveiling imminent?" Jovan stood up, grabbed the blanket, and threw it open. Andor gasped and grabbed at his chest as if suddenly in pain. Almost my exact reaction when I first saw it, Jovan said. Is that what I think it is? Andor asked in disbelief at what was laying there on the table. I'm pretty sure it is, especially after seeing your response. Lying on the table was what looked to be a huge fang, or a spike. Andor, seeing the look of confusion on the others in the room, thought some clarification of what they apparently discovered was due. Several years ago, we found ourselves, Jovan and I, and 5 others, face to face with the monster this spike came from. We all nearly died, but in the end we killed the beast. Andor stood up and placed a hand on the spike in disbelief. The spike measured nearly 5 feet in length. What were a bunch of druids doing with this thing? Andor asked, pondering the ramifications out loud. Better yet, Jovan said, what would a sect of debased druids in the gnarled woods and Ikra have in common? Maybe it's coincidence, Andor said. Perhaps after we left it, someone came along and dismembered it, like Thorfinn and his dragonhead collection. Then, discounting his own thoughts, Andor said, No, one displays trophies for all to see. They don't put it away in an unmovable chest. Then, looking at Jovan, May I take it with me to Sanctuary? That's what I brought it to you for, Jovan replied. Just one more thing to ask St. Columba about. And that, my friends, is where we will end tonight's reading. I hope you enjoyed it, because I know I enjoyed reading it to you. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, the notification bell, and hit the like button. Share to all your friends, and leave any comments in the comment section that you wish to. And until next time, and as always, see you soon.